A heavy, wet thud echoes through the wilderness as an iron axe fractures green wood. Listen closely. There is no roar of a mighty ocean harbor here. There is no rushing current of a great, navigable river delta. Instead, you are standing in the suffocating heat of a midsummer afternoon on an isolated, landlocked ridge deep within the Georgia Piedmont. The air is thick with the relentless, vibrating hum of cicadas, and the sharp, earthy odor of crushed red clay and bruised giant cane thickets catches in your throat. This is a desolate frontier. It is a place with absolutely no geographic blueprint for greatness. Yet, beneath the mud of this silent forest, a modern colossus is actively being engineered. Most of the world's legendary metropolises are born organically from nature's watery highways. Cities like New York, London, or New Orleans thrive because water bridges the gap between isolation and global commerce. But the city that will rise from this clearing defies all traditional logic. It is a metropolis conceived not by geography, but by a calculated, state-sponsored corporate spreadsheet. On December 21, 1836, the Georgia General Assembly authorized the multi-million-dollar construction of the Western and Atlantic Railroad. The explicit purpose was to forge an iron trunk line over the mountains, creating a direct commercial link between the Midwest and the Atlantic. This landlocked ridge became the southeastern anchor of that iron network. Imagine the sheer audacity required to look at a dense, unforgiving thicket of briars and oak trees and declare it the commercial heartbeat of a continent. There were no natural pathways here, only the cold, unyielding will of industrial ambition. But here is the hook question that defies logic. Why did the 19th century's most ambitious engineers insist on carving a massive rail terminal into a desolate wilderness that critics claimed was fit for nothing more than a single tavern, a blacksmith shop, and a grocery store? To find the answer, we have to look past the modern skyscrapers. We must peer into an empire built on high-stakes gambles. But a dark shadow is already stretching across these woods. A sudden, catastrophic disaster will soon turn the city's entire paper trail to ash, leaving its earliest corporate land deals permanently shrouded in mystery. Think about it. What secrets are hidden behind the lines drawn by these early pathfinders? And can an empire survive when its very memory is completely turned to thick smoke? Imagine a massive wooden drum turning rhythmically, its interior hollow filled with thousands of tightly rolled paper slips. With every single rotation, an unseen hand draws out a name, instantly granting ownership of a hidden piece of an untapped empire. This was the surreal machinery of the Georgia land lotteries, an unprecedented real estate apparatus that treated ancient forests like cheap raffle tickets. Following the systematic, tragic dispossession of the Muscogee Nation under the forced mandates of the Creek Indian Cession of 1821, the state government applied an aggressive, uncompromising geometry to the wilderness. They did not look at the mountains, the sacred valleys, or the rivers. Instead, they carved the newly vacated forests into rigid, mathematical survey grids, forcing an artificial matrix onto nature itself. Every individual land lot was carefully mapped by state surveyors to measure exactly 2,900 feet square, containing precisely 202.5 acres. These parcels were handed out blindly to ordinary citizens, many of whom had absolutely no obligation, no background in pioneering, and zero intention to ever set foot in the deep red mud they now legally owned. Instead, these abstract numbers on paper became hot commodities for highly speculative trades in smoky backrooms hundreds of miles away. Look closely at the deeds passing through eager, greedy hands. You see James R. Moore drawing Land Lot 51, a remote parcel he would soon sell to a hardy pioneer named Hardy Ivy, who built a crude double-log cabin in the thicket. You see John T. Waller winning Land Lot 52, Samuel Mitchell claiming Land Lot 77, and Jane Doss drawing Land Lot 78. These names and arbitrary numbers were the legal DNA of a future metropolis. They were the invisible foundations of what would become a global powerhouse, staked out by people who only saw the land as profit. But as these deeds shifted from hand to hand, a catastrophic vulnerability was quietly ticking away in the dark. The entire legal reality of this newborn empire rested on thin sheets of flammable parchment stored in a single wooden building. A ticking time bomb, waiting for a spark to change history forever. The freezing winter air of January 9, 1842, offered absolutely no comfort to the isolated frontier settlement. Under the cover of total midnight darkness, a sudden blinding orange glow violently punctured the sky. A catastrophic roar of snapping timber, shattering glass, and superheated wind erupted from the very center of the community. The wooden DeKalb County Courthouse, the sole repository of the region's entire legal memory, was completely engulfed in a raging, uncontrollable furnace. In a matter of mere hours, the ravenous flames did something far more terrifying than just destroying a physical structure. They completely vaporized history itself. Every single early land deed, every meticulously drawn survey map, every historical chain of title record, and every scrap of official paper that proved who owned what piece of the wilderness was instantly turned into thick, black, billowing smoke. By morning, nothing remained of the town's legal foundation but a smoldering, ash-filled void. The young settlement was thrust into an immediate, invisible crisis, a profound structural vacuum where legal reality once stood. There were no digital backups, no secondary vaults, and absolutely no physical evidence left to resolve future property disputes. This single catastrophic event completely shattered traditional legal logic and created an existential nightmare for the town's survival. It forces us to confront an astonishing, unresolved mystery. How do you construct a predictable, modern, multi-million-dollar capital of booming global commerce when the ultimate historical proof of who owns the very red dirt beneath your feet has been entirely wiped from human existence forever? Speculators held expensive deeds to land that technically no longer existed on any official ledger, while hardworking pioneers occupied log cabins with zero state records left to protect them from claim jumpers. The entire corporate and capitalist experiment in the Georgia Piedmont was hanging by a single, fraying thread, completely exposed to total chaos. Yet, as the town scrambled to recover from this devastating legal blackout, a far more sinister and physical clearing was already underway just beyond the smoke-filled horizon, one that would leave an entirely different kind of ghost haunting the forest. A chilling silence hangs over an abruptly abandoned clearing. Walk with me through the skeletal remains of what was, only weeks ago, a thriving community. If you look closely, you can still find ash warm beneath the communal hearths, and the heavy syncopated thud of state militias echoes through the ancient oak forests. This is the dark, uncomfortable truth hiding beneath the pristine tracks of the Western and Atlantic Line. Before a single iron tie could be spiked into the dirt, the state-sponsored industrial frontier demanded an absolute clearing of the human landscape. The multi-million-dollar future of this rail hub was entirely contingent on the systematic, forced removal of the indigenous nations who had inhabited these lands for generations. Under the contested terms of the 1835 Treaty of New Echota and the explosive outbreak of the Second Creek War in 1836, the state unleashed a brutal campaign of total erasure. In 1837, Lieutenant Edward Diaz led heavily armed federal troops and state militias on a relentless hunt for Creek refugees seeking shelter within the Cherokee Nation. Families were captured, bound, and marched away westward under horrific conditions that shocked contemporary eyewitnesses, who openly compared their suffering to that of galley slaves. To understand how completely this past was overwritten, look at the ancient Muscogee frontier village of standing Peachtree, known natively as Pakanahwili. For centuries, it sat proudly at the strategic confluence of the Chattahoochee River and Peachtree Creek, serving as a vital diplomatic and commercial gateway. But in January 1837, the village was violently repurposed, retrofitted into Montgomery's Ferry to transport white railroad surveyors, heavy equipment, and industrial iron directly into the heart of the wilderness. This cold-blooded logistical conversion laid the physical tracks for economic expansion while burying a vibrant civilization in the mud, which forces us to look past the myths of progress and confront a deeply haunting hook question hiding in plain sight. What happens to a city's historical soul when its absolute physical foundation requires the violent, systematic erasing of the human landscape that came before it? Behind the empty shacks of this outpost, an even darker paradox is quietly waiting to be uncovered by the very pathfinders driving the terminal pegs. Listen to the rhythmic, precise scratch of a graphite pen charting cold mathematical curves across a sheet of crisp vellum paper. Suddenly, a blunt sound cuts through the dense forest. The dull, metallic thwack of an iron mallet driving a heavy wooden peg deep into the red clay of Land Lot 78. Run your hand across that freshly splintered stake. You are touching the exact, definitive focal point where an industrial empire is scheduled to collide. The man holding the mallet is Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Harriman Long, the brilliant, deeply cynical chief engineer of the Western and Atlantic Railroad. Long is not a starry-eyed dreamer or a visionary city builder. He is a man of severe calculations and cold logic. A graduate of Dartmouth's class of 1809, he spent decades mapping the raw American West, famously branding the vast Great Plains as the Great American Desert, a barren wasteland unfit for human civilization. He literally wrote the book on iron infrastructure, publishing the nation's definitive railroad manual in 1829. Yet, an intense historical friction clouds the very moment this stone-cold surveyor fixed the coordinates of our future metropolis. Local civic mythology fiercely claims he drove this founding stake on July 4, 1837, deliberately tying the city's birth to the glorious anniversary of American independence. However, separate official records push the moment to September, when Colonel Abbott Hall Brisbane officially dubbed the cleared thicket Terminus. But look closer at Long's face as he packs away his precise instruments. He looks at this landscape with nothing short of utter contempt. When local landowners practically begged him to buy a half-ownership stake in the worthless acreage surrounding his new rail terminal for a trivial price, Long flatly refused. He laughed at their grand ambition, declaring with absolute certainty that this land would never be anything more than a rough tavern, a grocery store, and a blacksmith shop. Which brings us to the ultimate paradoxical hook question. Why did the chief engineer tasked with mapping this future metropolis look at his own creation with absolute disdain, outright refusing to invest a single dollar in the ground he had just marked for glory? Long packed his heavy bags and abandoned the site forever, completely unaware that ancient trails beneath his mud-stained boots were already secretly tracing out his own future. Listen to the sharp, violent crack of a leather whip slicing through the humid air. Hear the deep, agonizing groan of heavy iron-rimmed wagon wheels sinking up to their wooden axles in a bottomless, muddy morass. Look down at your feet. You are standing at a chaotic, completely unaligned intersection where the ancient wilderness refuses to yield to the futuristic designs of the industrial age. This is the raw spatial anatomy of the early settlement, a place where the grand, neat blueprints of 19th-century railroad planners smashed directly into the indelible, permanent footprints of the past. Chief Engineer Stephen Long and his fellow pathfinders dreamed of laying out a pristine, mathematically flawless grid of perfectly parallel streets and crisp right angles. But the rugged terrain of the Georgia Piedmont had an entirely different plan. Long before the first steam engine was ever drawn onto a blueprint, this land was completely shaped by an organic network of trails carved deep into the ridge contours over centuries of human travel. Run your fingers across an old, faded map and trace the Peachtree Trail, an ancient native highway winding all the way from the abandoned Muscogee village of Standing Peachtree to the mountain gap of Tocoa. Watch how it descends along the spine of the Piedmont Ridge until it violently collides with the Sandtown Trail, a prehistoric trading path cutting aggressively from east to west. Where these primeval corridors smashed together, they formed a confusing, highly asymmetrical, star-shaped junction that early pioneer traders called the Crossroads, but the modern world would soon know as 5 Points. Look at nearby frontier outposts like Decatur, Gainesville, and authoritarian Lawrenceville. Those older towns had already been neatly established for over a decade, laid out with civilized courthouse squares and predictable, orderly cardinal streets. Terminus, however, grew like a wild, untamed briar patch, anchored strictly by this prehistoric meeting of dirt paths. Which brings us to a fascinating, unresolved hook question. Can a futuristic, iron-driven transportation hub ever truly break free from the spatial architecture worn into the earth centuries before by the footsteps of indigenous hunters? As the deep mud worsened at 5 Points, an even darker, highly dangerous paradox was quietly brewing along the cleared vectors of the iron tracks, waiting inside the thick wilderness shadows. A sharp hiss of escaping steam power slices through the dense forest, but underneath that mechanized roar of progress, you hear a far more unsettling, rhythmic cadence. It is the cold metallic clink of heavy iron chains dragging across freshly cut wooden rail ties. Step into the long shadows stretching out from the newly laid tracks. This is the dark, hidden mechanism of the southern industrial frontier. While corporate planners in the distant state capital drafted grand speeches celebrating a glorious future of industrial mobility, the actual physical labor of leveling rugged ridges, blasting ancient rock, and driving heavy iron spikes was fueled by a brutal, ancient reality. Early Georgia railroads did not rely on free market industrial labor. They were built, maintained, and sustained by the state-sanctioned exploitation of enslaved human beings. Look closer at the very spatial geometry of this emerging settlement. Walk back down to that muddy crossroads where the ancient indigenous paths collide, the place we now call 5 Points. Today, it stands as a bustling transit hub, a celebrated center of urban connection and commercial vitality. But run your hand along the blood-stained historical ledger. In the antebellum era, this exact crossroads operated as a prominent, high-volume slave auction house. Here, human beings were casually inspected, priced, and sold alongside timber, iron, and livestock to fuel the railroad boom. This dark engine of commerce ran so deep into the city's financial foundation that its ripples would trigger a massive corporate reckoning more than a century later. In 2005, Wachovia Bank, a modern corporate successor to the historic Georgia Railroad and Banking Company, was forced to issue a formal, deeply solemn public apology. This occurred after intense archival research exposed that its founding institutions had directly owned enslaved people, accepted them as collateral on loans, and routinely used their forced labor to build the iron tracks. It uncovers a profound structural paradox that challenges everything taught about early American industrialization, forcing us to confront a chilling hook question. How did a frontier settlement that branded itself as a triumph of futuristic industrial mobility rely entirely on the ancient brutal violence of human bondage? But a wild new chaos is exploding just up the track, where a lawless settlement of mud shanties is rising. Let's step inside their dangerous world. Breathe in deeply. The suffocating air changes instantly as you step far away from the clean, pristine diagrams of the state planners and directly into a thick, pungent fog of cheap corn whiskey, rancid grease, and roasting pork. You hear a chaotic wall of sound. Rough, mud-splattered railroad laborers shouting and cursing over cards, their heavy leather boots sinking deep into the unyielding red clay. Welcome to the volatile front line of the industrial frontier, a lawless, chaotic outpost built entirely out of canvas tents and crude pine log shacks. In 1839, as the state of Georgia struggled desperately to turn its grand railroad dream into physical reality, a colorful and notoriously enterprising figure named John J. Thrasher, known to everyone simply as Cousin John, arrived at the desolate terminal site. Seeing an immediate opportunity to profit off the heavy influx of transient construction labor, he constructed a crude general store and settlement right next to the planned rail marker in Land Lot 78. This chaotic cluster of rough shelters quickly became known as Thrasherville. This wasn't just a temporary construction camp. It was the brutal staging ground for a relentless battle against an unforgiving nature. The desperate workers here were tasked with completing the Monroe Embankment, a staggering, massive earthen engineering project that cost a monumental $25,000 and required 2 long years of grueling manual labor just to level the uneven Piedmont Ridge for future tracks. Yet, as this rough community grew, it suffered a profound identity crisis, morphing constantly under a dizzying cascade of different names. Depending on who you asked in these early years, this muddy, lawless settlement was called Canebreak, Whitehall, Terminus, Deanville, or Thrasherville. It was a place without a stable title, defined only by the violent, grinding noise of continuous construction, which forces us to look past the pristine, whitewashed histories of urban planning and ask a captivating hook question. Before the skyscrapers and grand avenues could rise, what kind of desperate, lawless life truly played out in the mud shacks of Georgia's very first corporate railroad camp? But even as Thrasherville wrestled with its lawless identity, a massive engineering failure was about to force a radical realignment of the entire urban layout, rewriting the grid and bending the future of this town into an entirely new, permanently distorted path. Look down at a modern map of downtown Atlanta and try to make sense of the tangled streets. You will immediately notice something deeply unsettling. None of the major roads run straight. They completely defy the natural, cardinal orientation of the Earth, twisting and turning in a dense, claustrophobic maze that utterly ignores the magnetic field. To understand why this massive urban layout is so fundamentally fractured, we have to look back to 1842, when a catastrophic technical failure forced engineering pathfinders to completely abandon their pristine master plans. The original terminal marker that Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Long had driven into the red clay of Land Lot 78 was an absolute topographical disaster. It was entirely too rugged, steep, and narrow to support a major multi-line railroad junction. Realizing the impending economic crisis, former Governor Wilson Lumpkin, now operating as a high-stakes executive for the Western and Atlantic Line, orchestrated a brilliant real estate coup. He bypassed the failed site and negotiated a direct deal with a wealthy, strategic landowner named Samuel Mitchell. Mitchell agreed to donate a vital 5-acre tract of land located 4 blocks southeast in Land Lot 77, creating the raw area that would soon become known as State Square on Wall Street. To map this newly acquired industrial hub, Mitchell hired an ambitious surveyor named F.C. Arms in 1842, followed later by the extensive Prior Survey of 1846. Instead of aligning the new town lots with the north, south, east, and west points of a traditional compass, these pathfinders made a radical, compromising choice. They drew their straight lines perfectly parallel and perpendicular to the shifting diagonal axis of the iron tracks, which ran uniquely along the natural Piedmont Ridge from the northeast to the southwest. Major historic thoroughfares like Decatur Street and Marietta Street were violently bent to run directly alongside these iron vectors, permanently trapping the entire future metropolis in a severely skewed grid. Every single brick laid, every foundation poured, and every towering skyscraper built for the next 2 centuries was forever forced to conform to this distorted geometry, locking the growing city in an architectural trap, which forces us to look past modern urban design and confront a bizarre, fascinating hook question. Why does navigating the streets of downtown Atlanta today feel like wandering through a complex maze drawn up by 19th century railroad engineers who ruthlessly prioritized iron track contours over the alignment of the compass? Listen to the agonizing creak of massive timbers as a weary mule team drags a multi-ton iron beast through bottomless red mud in December 1842. This state-of-the-art steam locomotive, the Florida, cannot arrive under its own power because the coastal tracks are entirely unfinished. It must be physically hauled over rugged dirt roads just to make a brief, celebratory run. Beneath this exact junction, engineers buried a far more powerful artifact, an 800-pound rectangular block of gray granite. This is the official 0-mile post. When the settlement incorporated as Marthasville and later Atlanta, the state legislature used this stone as the absolute heart of the realm, decreeing that the municipal limits would be drawn as a perfect 1-mile circle extending in every direction from this coordinate. This engineered identity was forged in iron, preparing the hub for its ultimate trial. In 1864, General Sherman's Union troops put the young city to the torch, leaving a vast field of smoldering ash. Yet, true to its indomitable nature, the town refused to stay buried. It rose from the ruins with terrifying speed, earning its title as the Phoenix City. The primitive crossroads of Terminus evolved into Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, the busiest aviation hub on Earth. Every skyscraper and highway in this modern metropolis flows directly from the geometry drawn by those early pathfinders. Thank you for traveling back in time with us. Hit that subscribe button right now to join Chronicles of Time, and drop a comment below to tell us what lost world we should uncover next. Until then, keep looking directly at the incredible stories of history.